Now let's move on to our second speaker of the webinar, John Nowatzki, Extension Ag Machine Systems Specialist at North Dakota State University, is our second speaker, and he will discuss proof of concept for using UAS for various applied research projects in agriculture. John and his collaborators seek to ask, when are UAS effective and when are they not effective? It is worthy to note that John was a core participant in establishing the E-Extension UAS learning network that you're participating in today. John has a Bachelor and Master of Science degrees from North Dakota State University in agricultural education. John coordinates the NDSU Extension Agricultural Machinery Systems Educational Program. His subject matter areas include agricultural machinery selection and operation, precision agriculture, conservation tillage technologies, agricultural chemical application technology, and remote monitoring applications for farming. With that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to John.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the unmanned aircraft activities that we're doing at NDSU in Fargo, North Dakota. And I see, in looking at the participants, that I recognize some of your names. Appreciate that you're here, and be sure to put questions in the chat box anytime you want. What I'll do is basically go through these four issues, or four topics. First being what I see as applications for unmanned aircraft in agriculture in the Northern Plains, some of the equipment that we're using, and kind of a follow-up to the previous presentation on what they can be used for, and what they're appropriate for and what they're not appropriate for. Talk about what we're doing here at NDSU and our personnel involved, and some of the issues that I see associated with this activity. We do our activities with unmanned aircraft both in extension and in research, and beginning a little bit in teaching in both livestock and crop production. To date, most of our work has been done with crop production, but have two small rotocopters type UAVs, two small fixed wing aircraft UAVs, and we will be working with one large aircraft in a project this year, and I'll share more information about that as we go through, and particularly at the end of the presentation. I see that depending upon what people in agriculture, and I think mostly of farmers and agronomists and crop and livestock consultants, will be using. And if you're going to do just observation and scouting, I think a rotocopter type aircraft is more appropriate. If you're going to gather information for application maps, for example, then I think you need a fixed wing. We started with the rotocopter on the right, the 3DR X8, and used a couple of sensors on there. It came with a small GoPro camera, but we have now attached a thermal sensor to it as well. ICI 9640, it's Infrared Camera Incorporated is the name of the company, and we're using that over livestock. We're using it for weed identification, particularly herbicide resistant weeds, and we're using that for a number of issues related to managing crops, particularly water stress. That aircraft cost about $2,000. And it can be flown autonomously, as can the others. The aircraft on the left is the Phantom Pro, probably most recognizable one when you start talking to people about drones or unmanned aircraft. That aircraft with the sensors it came also with another GoPro, but we purchased from the company called Centera a NDVI RGB camera plus a quad 4-band sensor, and we paid about $3,000 for it, but the sensors, one sensor we paid, each of the sensors another $5,000, so it's quite expensive that way. Those, the two rotorcopters are limited in flight time to about 15 minutes and handle winds only up to about 15 miles per hour. We're using two fixed-wing small aircraft. The one on the right is the one we started with, the Trimble UX5. It came with that Sony NEX camera, and the camera has been modified to take RGB and infrared. That aircraft is more expensive. We paid close to $30,000, and that was a discounted price. It flies for about 50 minutes. Can capture imagery for fixed, for about 1 square mile in that 50 minutes. If the wind is right, it can handle winds up to 40 miles per hour. I have flown it in 30 miles per hour winds and had no difficulty flying it perpendicular to the wind, capturing high quality imagery. But I've seen it flown up to 40 miles an hour, so it can handle the winds on the northern plains. The aircraft on the left, Troy built, we bought that from RoboFlight for about $10,000 and came with one camera, one Canon SL camera, about a 70-inch wingspan. It can operate a little longer, maybe an hour to an hour 15 minutes, and again capture a little bit more imagery. Both of those are autonomous, and I see that as an essential part of using unmanned aircraft in agriculture. On the upper right hand side you see the Hermes 450, which is a large UAV. It's a 35-foot wingspan, has a internal combustion engine, and can capture, well, it can fly for 14 hours at a time. We'll be using that on a large project this coming year, something capable of capturing 25,000 acres with 1 square inch ground sample size, pixel size on the ground in 1 hour. So it'll change what we're doing with unmanned aircraft. One of the nice things about our work and doing work at a land-grant university is we have the research extension centers across North Dakota and do our work. To date, most of our flying has been on North Dakota State University land. Our projects are collaborative projects. We work with private industry. We do all of our work, all of our UAS work under the auspices of the Northern Plains UAS test site. It's one of 6 test sites across the United States that the FAA selected to integrate unmanned aircraft into the manned aircraft space. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with the Northern Plains test site because they do all of our applying for COAs. They have a mission commander present, either present or remotely present when we fly. We've gotten to the point now where that mission commander doesn't have to be physically present. They're just remotely present with technology. But what I wanted to point out here is that in the first year we flew just in one location. This year several locations across North Dakota, and next year again several locations, and we'll be using 4 small UAS and 1 large one. But what's interesting, I think, and worthwhile noting, is that we get most of our funds for this work through the North Dakota Department of Commerce, and the North Dakota legislature appropriated several $millions for research work at either of the North Dakota research institutions. And so as we apply for this, that's where we get the funding, but each dollar has to be matched dollar for dollar with private industry money. And I think that's the wisdom of one of the smart things our legislature has done, is requiring us to work with industry. And so if they give us $50,000, that only comes when we get $50,000 of real dollars from private industry. And that's not in-kind match, that's real money. And so it has really forced us, it forced me to work with these companies, and I appreciate it. It's been a really good experience. You see some of the companies. Centera is a Minneapolis-based company, sells small UAS and also provides services. AV is Air Environment, a California-based company that we're working with. LWS Survey is a survey company that uses small UAS in Canada to both monitor pipelines and to do volumetric calculations of open pit mines. Altavian is a Florida-based company but is now building one model of unmanned aircraft in North Dakota. We of course work with the commodity groups, the North Dakota Soybean Council and North Dakota Corn Council are both funding our work. And finally, the Elbit Systems of America is a company that we'll be working with our large UAV. Our objectives for our work are to evaluate not only the UAS options, but also the different kinds of sensors that are available. And again, since our funding, much of our funding comes from the Department of Commerce, we use an objective, we have an objective that looks at economic development. The only reason that we're receiving these funds is to promote, develop economic activity within the state and hopefully produce both more activity and more job opportunities. I work in extension, and so one of our objectives is an extension education program. These are some images of some of the camera sensors that we are using. RGB and infrared on the top line, the Sony that we have with our Trimble UX5, and then the two on the right are from Centera company. One is a dual sensor and one is a quad sensor. The dual sensor allows us to fly one time and collect both RGB and infrared, and the sensor on the right lets us collect 4 different bands at the same time, or areas of the electromagnetic spectrum. The thermal camera in the center is from the camera that we have from the Infrared Camera Incorporated. You get an idea of the size of these, very small cameras, and pretty costly. I think that camera is about, the one in the center we paid about $10,000 for, and gives us a unique temperature in Fahrenheit within about a half a degree, or more accurate than that, for each pixel in the image, and of course that requires regular calibration each time we fly. Then a hyperspectral sensor that we're using as well on our one of our fixed wing. We have a number of projects. At the beginning in 2014, we were just kind of looking at basic effectiveness. This year we're looking at nutrient deficiencies in corn and soybeans, doing stand counts in corn, and identifying noxious weeds on rangeland. All 3 of those we have done with fixed wing aircraft. In 2016 we'll continue the nutrient efficiency, and the reason for that is from a commercial point of view and from our extension point of view. The nutrient deficiencies and the stand counts, I think, are probably those first things that crop producers and livestock, but crop producers will pay for or will want. Weed identification is significant. We're doing some work with herbicide-resistant weeds, using thermal sensors to pick up, to identify herbicide-resistant weeds, and we're doing that in relationship to timing of the herbicides. It causes the resistant and the susceptible have different canopy temperatures, and we're able to identify that with herbicide-resistant, with the thermal cameras. Disease detection, we have projects going in sugar beets, potatoes, and soybeans. Our objective, one of our key objectives with our large UAV project next year, is to compare both the usefulness and the economics of small UAS, large UAS, and satellite imagery. And then we'll be doing some things with livestock inventory and livestock location. I'd like to certainly give credit to the people that I work with. Dr. Bajwa is our department chair and a remote sensing precision agricultural specialist. Ganesh Bora teaches our classes on related to precision agriculture, and myself. But it's I'm sure all of you, if you've begun to work, recognize the need to work with other scientists to make sure we're capable of operating the equipment and managing, processing the imagery. But when it comes to actually learning what can and can be done effectively with unmanned aircraft, it's essential to work with the agricultural scientists that are on the ground. And we collaborate with people across the state, both in extension and in the research centers that are doing ongoing research projects, and we're able to fly over those and do correlation to their already collected scientific data. I see applications of unmanned aircraft. Small ones will be for monitoring and scouting, but I also think that they'll be effective for managing issues, whether it's specific issues related to diseases and weeds. I also see that we'll be using small UAVs to collect imagery that can be processed into a vegetative index map across the field and be able to use for in-season fertilization, for example, or other herbicide or even fungicide applications. I think we'll see many agricultural producers and many crop consultants, livestock consultants using small unmanned aircraft in the future. But I also think that we're going to see large UAVs as the rules change to allow beyond line of sight. We're going to see large UAS flying whole counties or whole areas, whole regions, whole states, capturing imagery, managing it, processing it, even analyzing it into specific applications like a vegetative index, and then storing it in the cloud and making it available to landowners and growers on a per acre basis, say 50 cents an acre, $1 an acre, whatever, but you let them clip out on a regular basis whatever they need for their fields. To do identify management issues, to do application maps, in-season fertilization, yield predictions. That's one of the things that we've done quite effectively, so I can see that would be valuable for producers. All these other activities as well. So I see an opportunity for large unmanned aircraft as well. In the area of livestock, certainly real-time monitoring and scouting is important, and something that livestock producers quickly recognize the value of with unmanned aircraft, both in real time or letting the computer count in monitor activities after the image is mosaicked. I think using thermal cameras to identify some of these issues of fever, estrus, and birthing activities are important. Estrus would be to identify animals that are in the estrus cycle for artificial insemination, and then birthing is something that female animals' temperature rises a couple of degrees Fahrenheit, say 36 hours before giving birth, and so we'd be able to fly over a herd, pick those animals out. We're doing some work this coming year in identifying active radio RFID tags, not just passive ones, but active RFID tags with batteries in them can be read from 100 to 200 feet away. So that'll make it possible to identify animals and get information from them from using a small UAV. Frequently find it necessary when I talk to producers in particular, but also to unmanned aircraft companies, that in agriculture there's plenty of challenges, and this just shows 3 examples of corn plants that are chlorosis, yellowing. One on the left is nitrogen deficiency, one on the right is sulfur, and the one on the bottom is excess moisture. All of them show yellowing, but in nitrogen the yellowing is on the older leaves, on sulfur it's on the newer leaves, and on excess moisture it's on all of the leaves. And my message here is you know, if we're going to take this imagery, process it, and tell a grower or farmer that, you know, you have a sulfur deficiency, it has to be that and not a nitrogen deficiency or something else. So this is just another slide showing the same thing. You know, the 6 on the left, the 6 corn leaves on the left, all show chlorosis. But can we fly over a field and say that this is due to a disease or drought, or is this due to a potash deficiency, or is it a nitrogen deficiency? And we need to be able to do that. So there's a great need for more research. Some of this has already been covered with our previous speaker, but this shows a image collected of about 1 acre. So you know, I think there's about 20 images in here, and they've been stitched together to make a mosaic, and this looks very good. But we have found that we have had trouble with, most of the time, with our mosaicing software causing some distortion. These two images, the one on the right is the original image, the one on the left is of the same area with from the mosaic. And you see the one on the left is a little bit more blurred. This just gives an example of the kind of imagery that we're collecting with our unmanned aircraft, and you see the detail that can be used to identify specific issues, even do stand counts. This shows an image of one of the things that we've been successful in doing is doing stand count in corn. We've been fortunate on this work. We work on one of the research stations where the ongoing research on stand count already occurs, and they've got over a 1 acre area. They've got like 50 1 meter by 2 meter areas marked off with little flags. They go out and physically count them, and we do the same with our imagery, and we've come up with statistically the same numbers. So this is something that we can do. And that's important in a number of different crops as well. This is just shows an image of color and infrared imagery and an NDVI. Some of the infrared imagery on the right. On the image on the left, you can see very little. And the one on the right, on annual grass control, you can see significant differences. And when farmers see this, they recognize immediately the value of this kind of imagery. This is an image of that we were doing with predicting yield in corn, and in this case we were fairly accurate in being able to fly over different plots and to do a correlation to yield, being able to make yield estimates in the summertime for fall before harvest. This shows some work we're doing with phenotyping. In this case, on the top is soybeans, on the bottom is sunflowers. Just being able to correlate the relationship between crop maturity and NDVI values with different hybrids. This image shows another area that we're working in, and that's water stress in irrigated crops. This particular one is sugar beets, and I don't have the statistics here, but the image on the bottom is greener because it has received more water during the summer. This is an image of using a method, a computer method called maximum likelihood method to identify weeds, and we were able to identify specific weeds and then ask the computer to find the rest of them, and been very effective, but that's still research, ongoing research. This is a method of identifying herbicide susceptible and herbicide resistant weeds, and one of our graduate students is working on this for his PhD using thermal imagery to be able to identify the difference, and we're seeing up to a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit difference after herbicide application using our thermal camera. We're using the same camera to identify specific weeds, finding that they have different spectral reflectances. This is an image of thermal image of cattle. The lighter the color, the warmer the temperature, the darker the color, the cooler the temperature. And so we're using that. As you zoom in, you can pick out unique temperatures and then have the computer average them and come up with a body temperature for the animal. Some of the issues that I see with unmanned aircraft in ag is, first of all, I believe that we need to have an autopilot doing the flying for us. We don't want to be having to control it ourselves. Not that we obviously need to interact with it when needed, but to me, to be effective and to be adapted by farmers and other agriculturalists, it needs to be autonomous. I talked about the need for ag scientists. We still need that on-the-ground information to be confident with what we're doing. Lots of work to be done in sensors and cameras, and it's interesting to see how much smaller and less expensive they're getting almost month by month. And data transfer is an issue. We fly for one afternoon with a small UAV and collect maybe 10 gigabytes of data, and transferring that electronically is time consuming. Data management is time consuming. There's a number of softwares that's already been talked about, but each one of them we find at least causes some image degradation without significant effort with RTK GPS or ground control points. In the end, it's really data analysis that the farmers want and ranchers want, not the imagery itself. It's the analysis. Again, I've talked about this, but the future, I see individuals, farmers using small UAVs, and I see crop and livestock consultants doing it, and then I see a certain opportunity here that we'll see large areas collecting, large UAVs collecting large areas of imagery and storing it in the cloud and making it available field by field. To end here, I'd like to spend a few minutes, just maybe 2 minutes, to talk about our large UAV project. We're going to use a large unmanned aircraft to collect imagery over about 100,000 acres once a week at 3,000, 5,000, and 8,000 feet. We use a small one on some selected fields, like 10 fields on the same time. And then we'll also use satellite imagery, Black Bridge rapid eye imagery over the entire area, and make a correlation between these imagery, and we'll use personnel that will actually be walking the ground, collecting ground information, and using some active optical sensor types on sprayers to collect NDVI data. This just shows an area that we're collecting it from. This is in eastern North Dakota, about 30 miles north of Fargo, and it's 4 miles wide and 40 miles long that we'll be collecting the imagery on. We have a number of objectives pretty similar to what we're doing, but in-season fertility, weed disease, insect management, yield estimates, and then individual farmers will have access to this data as well, so they'll be using it as needed. We're working with producers. We're working with the Department of Commerce for the funding, the North Dakota test site for managing the flights and getting the COA. NDSU will manage and process the imagery, and then of course Albert Corporation, the private sector company, will be actually doing the aircraft flying it. We'll be collecting yield data from individual farmers, not all of them, but just the selected ones. We'll have people out there with their handheld spectrometer, and then we'll be using the green seeker or optical sensor technology. This is just a quick image of showing the whole project in one slide. It's a ground control station. This aircraft will have 2 people in the ground control station that will be operating the aircraft remotely. We'll have 2 different kinds of cameras in it, and because we are required to do line of sight, we'll actually have a fixed wing, a manned aircraft flying formation with this all the time, so that the visual observer will be in visual, be able to see the aircraft all the time. Just kind of a final slide here. We've done some demonstration under the model aeronautics rules at our Big Iron show, a farm show a couple of years ago, and the local newspaper published this little cartoon that said supposedly the large tractor speaking, saying we may be the biggest pieces of equipment out here, but it's the smallest ones that are creating the most buzz. And I am finding just a tremendous amount of interest in small and large unmanned aircraft. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer that. I see one of the questions that Wayne, you put there, has there been interaction with landowners in the flight area, and do you have a sense of the level of concern of the UAS overhead? That corridor covers 160 square miles, and we identified through tax records all of the landowners in the area. There are 518 landowners. We sent them each a letter to explain the project to them, invited them to a couple of public meetings, and about 100 of them came to public meetings. We explained in the letter that if they wanted the imagery, we would share that with them on a weekly basis. And the concerns were, first of all, primarily with safety from pilots, aerial applicator, and we had the head of our Northern Plains UAS test site there, who is a general in the North Dakota Air National Guard, and the head of our test site answered those questions. He did an excellent job. I think we indicated that, basically that it'll be the same as a manned aircraft, so it will be, the FAA will know all the time where that aircraft is, and there'll be NOTAMs filed. So we kind of allayed any of those fears. And then this other issues were associated with privacy, and we indicated that first of all, this would be protected imagery. We wouldn't be sharing it with other companies. We wouldn't be sharing it with the government, and we would share it individually with those people that wanted it, that are, if you own the land. And finally, we gave everybody an opportunity to opt out. We would block out their image, their field, as we fly over it, but nobody has chosen on that. Any other questions?